I'm Sherry Goodman, Director of Education here at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, and I'm truly delighted to welcome you to our program today with Aaron Marcus, which is being held in conjunction with his beautiful exhibition here in the reading room, which actually has been here since January and is closing on July 1st. So Aaron will be providing an overview and insights into his pioneering work with computer art and experimental visual language design. So I'll just say that Aaron is a noted Berkeley-based artist, graphic designer, and author, and principal of Aaron Marcus and Associates here in Berkeley. And he was the first graphic designer to work full-time with computers, and the first professional designer of virtual reality, among other firsts in his long and distinguished career. Aaron has written approximately 36 books and approximately 300 papers, and his work is in the collections of SF MoMA, the Letterform Archive in San Francisco, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where I gather his work was recently on view this past fall, and where he participated in a major conference, and also here at the Berkeley Art Museum, among other notable institutions. So with that, I will turn things over to Aaron, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm going to pass around a sheet of paper. If you want to add your name and email address, I promise to send you a PDF copy of this presentation, plus 2 other freebies, which are monographs that I published many decades ago about this work and some of my other work of that time, which I can easily send you. And a artist designer's business card in case you want it. I want to thank Larry Rinder, executive, chief curator and director of the museum, for his interest in my work. Also to thank Lisa Calden, Tracy Jones, and one other person, Sherry Rickson? No. No, and Sherry, for arranging for the... Rachel Dixon, there we go. The 3 people who were involved in bringing my work into the museum, actually, and Sherry for arranging this presentation. Excuse me. I also want to thank Jennifer Syme, who was... Oh, there you are, of BAMFA, for encouraging me to present my work and bring it to the attention of Larry, who got interested in me and decided to incorporate it into their permanent collection. Finally, I want to thank my fiancée, Sandy Spear, who's sitting here, for editing the presentation to keep it from being insufferable. So, before I start, I want to define a few terms. Sherry already used a few of them. Computer graphics are any kind of imagery that result from computer-controlled media. We take it a lot for granted today. All of our TV shows, our commercials, our films, etc., involve so much computer graphics, effects, animations, etc., but that didn't exist until, well, officially the mid to late 60s. Graphic design is a profession involved with typography, signs, symbols, icons, color, layout, and sequencing to communicate meaning. And particularly, I'm interested in information-oriented graphic design. Conceptual art are those works in which the concepts involved are as important as the form, in some cases even more important than the specifics of the visual form. User interface design that I've been involved with for about 40 years, 50 years, is designing the mental models, navigation, interaction, and appearance of computer-based systems to enable people to use computers effectively, to make them easy to learn and easy to use. Visible language are all the means of language expression. Typography, other kinds of signs and symbols, including what's called concrete poetry or visual poetry that tries to present emotional poetic thought where the form is as important as the semantic content. So let me start by saying, as I take you for a quick tour through these works, can any of you remember when you first learned to read? That was a long time ago for most of us. I actually can. I can remember being a child and being amazed to see these unfolded sheets of paper in a book full of signs and symbols that I couldn't read, that I knew I would be learning, and that I knew contained information. Some of this work and my other works are about the awe or the inspiration or the magic and the mystery of being able to interpret these signs and symbols. I'm reminded of a scene from a movie called Black Robe. Most of you, perhaps none of you, have ever heard of it. It's a very fine movie about a Parisian Catholic priest in the 17th century traversing the wild forests of Canada on his way to a particular site where he's going to reestablish a church, I think. And he's traveling with Native American assistants. They meet a chief. The chief sees the priest making scratchy marks on a white surface and says, "What's that? Why would you do that? Or what use is that?" And the priest says, "I'll show you how powerful it is. Tell me a secret that no one knows." So the chief whispers into the ear of the priest. The priest promptly scribbles something down, hands the book or the diary to his colleague, and the other man says, "Oh, chief, your wife is going to have a baby next spring." And the chief is amazed. How could he know such a private, secret thing? And then he begins to sense that something was passed through this book, the written symbols, without language spoken, that could communicate meaning. When ancient navigators stare at the starry night at sky, they see constellations, forms that we don't pay much attention to or see these days. I was trying to capture some of that awe when I was programming a computer-controlled photo typesetting machine for the first time connected to a computer in 1972 while I was on sabbatical at Yale. There was a time when there wasn't much computer graphics imagery. I was among some of the first people in 1967 to start programming computers to generate images and being interested in the meaning, the expression, the form of these images. Until that time, images like this would have been created by photomechanical means. Evolving Gravity on the right, this one is called, Evolving Gravity here and Noise Barrier here on the right, was created by taking out the glass sheet of type fonts, characters that was part of the machine, and inserting my own piece of glass that I had blackened with candle soot, and scratching away with a pointed instrument to make random scratches. I put it back in the machine, created a command to set some text. I can't remember, but for all I know, it was setting a column of the New York Times. But it came out looking like this, which is what I sort of expected, looking like some strange alien writing that I was looking at, trying to understand, trying to interpret. By the way, this blank area here at the bottom is the result of a programming error on my part. And that's one of the interesting and delightful aspects of, at the time, programming computers. There were often bad things happening, which turned out to be quite good. It made the composition more interesting. These are 3 other smaller prints as lithographs are similar products of a phototypesetting machine connected to a computer that I carried out in '72 and later colorized in 1974. They too were trying to create interesting, intriguing visual images out of straightforward letter forms or typographic characters that created a visual tapestry of sorts, sort of like the symbolism hidden in Persian rugs, or the strange mystical and emotional content of Paul Klee drawings or paintings, better. So that's a quick background to these works. I'd like to step back in time at the beginning and say a few words briefly about the span of my life creating these images of typography dreaming. I was born in the Midwest in Omaha, Nebraska in 1943. I studied physics at Princeton with my lifelong friend here, Bill Horwich in the back there, and went with him on to Yale to study graphic design. In my career as an artist and designer, I was, I believe, the first graphic designer to ever use computers. I was, I think, the first artist to program virtual reality back in '71. In the graphic design world, the American Institute of Arts, AIGA, Graphic Arts, made me a fellow, and the Computer Human Interaction Society, the largest user interface group, elected me to their academy. I was very pleased that SF MoMA decided to purchase 20 of my early works of computer art and design. And I have, this is incorrect, published 37 books, not 70. That means edited, co-edited, written, co-written, etc. And I've always acted as a kind of bridge between the worlds of graphic design and visual arts and the computer world, or computer graphics. So here are my late mother and father. My father was born in Russia, in the South Ukraine. My mother's mother was born and raised in Kiev. My late brother also was involved with computers and education. There I am as a teenage sailor getting ready for some high school party. And in high school, I was also signed up for ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, and had to wear a very hot, scratchy uniform 2 days a week. When I was young, my brother and I used to tell stories to each other when we went to sleep. And we invented something we called the Big Book of Knowledge that had the answers to every possible question that you might ask. It was a precursor to Google, but of course we didn't realize that at the time. I loved to draw from childhood and copied the styles of Walt Disney, of Al Capps, Lil Abner, and others. I was also interested in science fiction from childhood. I drew lots of cartoons, rocket ships, ray guns, and robots. I even designed a rocket ship control panel in the basement of my house by which my brother and I would take imaginary trips to other planets. In fact, I thought I had been born on another planet and deposited with pseudo-parents in Omaha. I loved science and art and cartooning all through high school. Here on the right is my Goo machine and a space helmet being modeled by my late younger brother. Here are some of the drawings I used to make when I was 10 years old, 11 years old. Didn't you all do things like that? No. Well, that's what I did. And I had eventually about 1,600 comic books, and all of them had original comic books and magazines. So I went on to college to study physics and philosophy, and also German for physics. I achieved escape velocity from physics in '65 and went to art school for half a year. I had no idea what anyone was talking about. They said, "Oh, that works." And I would say, "What is it that's working? I don't know what you mean." Gradually, and it did take about half a year, I understood what people were talking about and pointing to and gesturing about. And I had so much fun learning about typography, color, whole semester classes in color. I enjoyed it so much that I had more fun in those 3 years of graduate school than I ever had in my entire life, before or after. And as a result, I nearly did not sleep for 3 years. I would always be at school, working on my projects, studying about this new subject matter. Luckily, in 1967, one of my colleagues said, "You really ought to go to these interviews. You might get a summer job." I didn't have one at the time in late May. And I went to an interview that was like a scene out of Men in Black, the original Men in Black. 2 engineers were sitting at a small table. I was across from them. They were dressed in dark suits, narrow ties, white shirts, didn't smile. I looked at them and said what you should never say at a job interview: "I have no idea why you would want to hire me." But I've been studying physics, and I have learned to program computers by myself, and now I'm studying typography and color and layout. And the 2 of them, deadpan, turned to each other. One of them smiled a little bit. They turned back to me, and one of them said, "Well, actually, we're looking for someone exactly like you." And that was my beginning in computer graphics. Ba-boom. I wound up at Bell Labs, which I didn't know about. It was the most sophisticated, advanced laboratory for computer technology, among other things, in the world at that time. And I had a great time learning to program computers. In the next year, I started teaching at Princeton after graduate school, so I could become a consultant at AT&T Bell Labs, again in Murray Hill, New Jersey. It was at that time that I programmed, as my assigned project, a prototype desktop publishing system about 10 years before you all came to know them in about 1982, 83. And this was intended for the picture phone, which had just been invented in '64. I also worked as a conventional graphic designer, designing publications, signs and symbols, logos, etc., including one for Oxfam America, a version of which is still in use by Oxfam today, 50 years later. I designed this brochure for an exhibit of Swiss posters that I collected. And the cover of this document is very much in keeping with my style of design, which is flush left, ragged right typography of letter forms, generally without serifs, the little marks at the end that define a certain class of type forms. Lots of open space, geometric shapes being used, strong, simple color. Those are hallmarks of that design style, which I adopted and liked very much and have used ever since. It's apparent here in these Jewish New Year cards that I designed, and in this cover for the Princeton University Library. I eventually became the designer for the university and designed all the signage, publications, catalogs, newsletters, etc., for the university in the latter years of my stay at Princeton. While I was at AT&T, I was able to use their equipment to create computer art like this, which has been exhibited around the world and is in various museum collections now. This is modeled after the status display lights on an IBM 360 mainframe computer. The lights would be blinking on and off. You would see this in science fiction movies all the time to show advanced technology. And I love this appearance of displays of binary logic. It was simply beautiful in itself, so I created artificial displays to show that. And other examples of randomness combined with order. Here's a mathematical depiction of a kind of moire pattern, which is the expression of a mathematical space being visualized, which I thought in itself had formal beauty worthy of being displayed and admired. And another example of chaos versus order. Eventually my time at Bell Labs came to an end, and I was able to use equipment at Princeton University, which was state-of-the-art interactive 3D color graphics of vectors, of lines. Now, this looks quite primitive, and it is. But at the time, this was a state-of-the-art machine in 1971. There were only 5 such machines in the universe. One at Princeton in the chemistry department, I think. Another at the Pentagon. Another at the manufacturer's place. A spare one somewhere. And some other notable high-level government site had the 5th one, I think. And with that, for the first time, I could create artworks which were in 3-dimensional space, and you could view them and wander around interactively. And you, if you were lucky, find this little creature here. It's a little stick man wandering, a stick person, wandering around in the space and twirling typography. Again, I was interested in typography, dreaming about what it could be and how it could be used. So right now, the program for this artwork is posted at a site called GitHub to invite programmers around the world who may be looking at it to see if they can reprogram this and bring it back into being on mobile phones, because it's something that could be done very simply. So at that time, this is what I did on sabbatical from Princeton at Yale. And I, in fact, did another series of works, very simple program. The image is stating the city sleeps, but someone is watching. And according to the order of the letter in the alphabet, A to Z, like 3 C's, A, B, C, it creates this little urban skyline. I did a similar series of works on every state capital of the United States. While I was exploring these computer-based artworks, I was also continuing to do sort of drawings and other works that explored the role of typography and imagery, and in this case, scientific chart content. This was press-on lettering on chart paper of the time, which fascinated me, and I did quite a number of works of this kind that were published in Europe. I also did a number of conceptual artworks whose content was focused on symbols and signs. If I asked myself, if I wanted to make an X across the entire United States, 3,000 miles wide, where would I find a sheet of paper large enough, and where would I get enough ink to make such a mark? Well, at that scale, old media are not going to do it. But telecommunications media can still make its mark at that scale. So after some arrangements with the AT&T in New Jersey or New York City, I arranged to go to the corner of 42nd Street and 5th Avenue in Manhattan to a public telephone booth and initiate a conference call with 4 other telephone booths in the United States. People walking on the streets of Omaha, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. found themselves connected to 4 other people in the United States when they answered the phone. In those days, conference calls were not so frequent, so regular in experience. I explained what I was doing, We talked about the weather, about politics. Nixon was the president at the time, and the nature of this as an artwork. And when we were done, we hung up. The X ceased to exist, except in documentation. In another work, a year later, I think, I went again into New York City to the basement of the United Nations, to a bank of public telephones, again by prearrangement with AT&T. I started to call at one phone. It went to AT&T's long lines office by satellite and by transatlantic cable, transocean cable through Japan and Europe, and came back to the phone on the right. I picked up both telephones and delivered a short lecture to myself about the nature of this work, its meaning, and its importance. By the way, with a half-a-second time delay of my voice circling the Earth. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, but you almost cannot speak when your audio signal is delayed by half a second. It is so conflicting in your brain, but I stumbled through it and completed the work, hung up the phones, and that was the end of it except for documentation. The only other thing I can say is I looked slightly different then. I had more hair, alas. In '78, was I still, just before I left Princeton, I had left Princeton, was in Jerusalem, teaching there, and was appointed a research fellow at the East-West Center in Hawaii to visualize global energy interdependence. So I invited 4 other professionals from Iran, India, China, and Japan to join me, and we created an audiovisual slideshow that used charts, maps, and diagrams, no words, to communicate the facts, the need for global cooperation for energy to solve the world's problems. That was an example, again, of interest in sign and symbol design, and in fact, it changed my career because I moved towards information-oriented graphic design and sort of prepared my way for my professional future in user interface design. So in the 80s, I taught here at UC Berkeley. I worked at LBL. I started a research project funded by DARPA, which is the Defense Department's Advanced Research Project Agency, to redesign the appearance of C code, the largest publication of all things going on worldwide because of the huge amount of code that is generated by people around the world. My firm consulted with many different companies in the US and Europe and Samsung in South Korea, et cetera, and companies in Japan. The company grew to about 25 people in Emeryville and New York City. I continued to do some artworks during this time, including in 2008, a plan to save the United States by reducing its budget, its deficit, or its debt considerably, in something I called face bucks. Not Facebook, face bucks. The premise is the US Treasury Department will change its rules, which it can tomorrow, and allow anyone's face to appear in our currency, official currency, and logos on the back of whatever company you want, Google, Amazon, provided each patron pays $100 million to the US government for that privilege. Currency lasts only a limited amount of time, about 18 months for $1 bills. So I thought this was a way to make quite a lot of money for the US government, since it's almost impossible to tax very rich people and get money out of them because they have very expensive lawyers who help to find ways out of that. In 2011, I began lecturing about human-computer interface, user interface design in science fiction movies. I published a number of books that I did write or co-write, including one called Cuteness Engineering, Designing Adorable Products and Services, which was about how people today, professionals, are making products that are so cute, charming, especially popular in China, South Korea, and Japan. It was a few years ago that SF MoMA bought my works, and in the following year, I donated away almost all of my work to about 5 or 6 museums, including BAMFA, and as Sherry mentioned, Victoria and Albert Museum. Over the last 40 years, I've published a number of books, as mentioned here are some of them, that have a lot to do with symbol design, icon design, user interface design. And here are some of the clients that we've worked for in the past 40 years. About 1/3 of the Dow Jones Industrial Average companies, usually. We've won some awards here and there for products that we've designed, or user interfaces, or publications that I've designed in the past. So after 50 years, 60 years of this activity, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've tried to bridge the worlds of design and art, and also design and art versus computer technology, to make computer people more aware of the humanities, the value of the humanities, the value of art, the importance of effective communication. I've trained perhaps 5,000 to 10,000 people at tutorials and lectures and workshops over the past 40 years throughout the computer world, including a number of the founders of Silicon Valley companies in the early days. I still continue to be the chair of a conference called Design, User Experience, and Usability, which will take place next in Orlando, Florida in July. And I'm pleased that the Letterform Archive in San Francisco has made a commitment to publish a monograph about my life's work in art and design, which will be out next year. As for where this all goes, I certainly look forward to travel with Sandy, especially to visit our children and grandchildren in Boston, Berlin, Austin, and Denver, which keeps us busy, and Skyping with the grandchildren, continuing to teach, as I do occasionally do. I'm an expert witness for legal clients about user interface design, and I do continue to write blogs and articles and at least one more book. I also have the challenge of organizing about 150,000 photos that I have on my computer and hard drives of all the family photos, etc. I do love to read detective novels, watch movies, and draw, often drawings of my grandchildren placed into biblical stories that are read every Sabbath. And I shall be continuing to dream about the importance, meaning, and possibilities of signs, icons, symbols, and typography, which is where we began. Thank you very much, and I'll take your questions. Again, if you, I see my deck of cards over there. If anyone wants one, you're welcome. If anyone wants to sign this sheet, as I say, I promise to send you a PDF version. And I'll be happy to take any questions or comments for a little while. Yes?
Well, early in the computer graphics and computer art, the technology severely limited what you could do using that technology. And now it seems like sort of anything goes. You know, it's
Well,
how, I mean, I just wondered how you see sort of that change.
in the beginning, it was very difficult to program computers to do anything, and especially for visual arts artwork production. I found that the more I tried to demand of the computer that it do what I want, the less likely I was to succeed. and that if I just went with the flow and accepted some of the strange things that happened, including random errors, it would be all for the good. It was so time-consuming. I mean, most people, certainly young people now, have no knowledge of the days of typing up punch paper cards, delivering decks of cards, as I did at Bell Labs, to the card deck operator recipient, who would then feed them into a computer, and the next day I might get some results back, not in the next 5 seconds. And then if I could not understand what went wrong with my program, I might have to consult with a systems programmer, and these would be people in special rooms, quiet and isolated, who would look at 500-page printouts of my code in binary or hexadecimal and look through this just like I experienced as a child, through page after page of unintelligible symbols and signs. And they would say, "Oh, there's your mistake." They could find it immediately because they knew how to read hexadecimal code very easily. And I realized I'm in the presence of high priests who are looking at the entrails of a goat and visualizing the future. It was also at that time that I first had the experience of being completely surrounded by a computer, because mainframe modules were very large. They were kept in carefully enclosed, refrigerated, raised floor rooms. And at one point, I'm not sure why I was there, but I wandered this way and that way, and suddenly I looked around, and all around me was nothing but computer modules. There were no human beings, only the computer and myself. And I had a tiny religious experience and thought, oh my gosh, this is the future, where computer technology will surround us, for better or worse, and I can't do anything about it. This is the destiny of humankind. In those days, everything was hard and limited, as you mentioned. Colors were limited on pens, on CRT displays, etc. That advanced line drawing system, the LDS-1, could only draw 2,000 vectors. Nowadays, so much more can be done. These phones we carry around are more powerful than the supercomputers of the past. And it is possible to do not everything, but so much more, so much faster, by so many more people. People who are trained professionally and people who aren't, people who just want to play around and stumble with things. So it does become a challenge to determine where is the artistry, what are the metrics or characteristics of quality or value, who can create this, who should create this, who does create this, and how is it consumed and used. All of those are challenges or issues that have just blossomed and grown in the last 40 years. This was an introduction to a time that was much more primitive, much more limited, and kind of much more visceral, in a way, concrete. Don't know if I exactly answered your question, but thank you for the question. Yes,
First of all, thank you.
Mr. Stein.
I think what's obvious to probably everyone here is how visionary, how absolutely visionary your work is, your life and your work, the creative element of that. And then for me personally, what's very interesting is a comment that you made explicitly, but it's implicit, and that's the bridging science, technology, and humanities. So the question that I have is, what's the status of morality in all
Just that simple question.
You know, and there are two parts to it. One is there a moral vision, a bridge within your vision and your visionary work that you can, at this point, articulate? And then the other part, and they're related but they're not identical, is the sheer power of possibility of you just said it a few minutes ago. You got very early on the destiny of the world is technology. Well, destiny is basically a deterministic, you know, kind of concept. So what is the role of morality and its relationship to the sheer power of technology?
A simple question. In this day and age, it becomes more and more difficult to know what's human,
Right.
to know what's true,
Right.
to know what's real.
Right.
I thought many decades ago, as I was working with this technology, that with the rise of robot technology, AI, etc., that we would be challenged in our definitions of ourselves, of what human relations are, etc. I don't know that I have a quick, pat answer to what is moral or what is appropriate. What was most important for me was to keep asking questions, to be aware of these possible threats. There was a conference back in the 70s called maybe it was called the Information Explosion or something like that. It took place at the State University of New York in Albany or somewhere else nearby. Maybe it was in Rochester. But it brought together humanists and technologists, and they could talk to each other about the coming, well, late 70s and 80s and what was going on. And it seemed clear to the advanced technology people, and I was hanging around them, that the humanists were worried about all the wrong things. They were worried about technology that, from the technology point of view, was already obsolete. Please, you're not, we don't worry about that stuff you're screaming about and exclaiming about. Yeah, we used to do that, but do you know what's coming? And the humanists were not even aware. So there's certainly so much, seemingly greater awareness of AI, robot technology, the ability to create deep fake videos, etc., the potential impact on our learning, our education, our communication, our voting process, our electoral process, etc. So that seems good, and I have to think about if I've read about or if I sense that somehow some of the political pundits, the TV comedians, etc., have missed some important aspects of what's hiding inside of Google and Facebook, etc. But I just think it seems to me that there's a healthy skepticism. One of the things that I tried to avoid was being labeled as a pro-technology or technology equals good, or it's sufficient to say do no evil.
Right.
That was superficial, maybe even covering up some aspects of things. So a healthy skepticism can keep people aware of the latest version of ethics in design, ethics in technology. One of the things that I have seen is that there are more courses in technology and design that deal with ethics. They did not exist 10 years ago. So maybe, the optimistic view is, oh good, some people are becoming more aware. It could be that they're just learning, oh, so what are they complaining about? Ah, okay, I think I know how to get around that. That's a very pessimistic view. I hope it's not so. But I can't say at this point where that will go. We will need another 5 or 10 years to say, if only I had known. Thank you for a deep and not too easily answered question. Maybe we'll continue if there's nothing else, but let's see if there's another. Yes?
Well, just a few short comments. To your question a little bit about morality, ethics, technology. One person who, and I'm sure you know her, humanist who I think does stay up to date, she's at MIT, Sherry Turkle. She's written a number of books about this. I actually had her in as a conversant with the Matrix artist a few years ago, Sherry Turkle and Desiree Coleman, who had done videos about interacting through avatars with other people. And so Sherry Turkle has addressed that.
Well-
And she has also addressed some of this human interaction with cuteness in design.
I hope I can remember to say about 2 or 3 things. Did Sherry Turkle write the book about the telephone? Or no, that was someone else.
She wrote about conversation.
But it took a very long time for a book about the telephone to appear and how it changed society. When, in 1964, Bell Labs created the picture phone and introduced it at the New York World's Fair. I was working at Bell Labs in '67, and I went around protocol by sending a letter to the president of Bell Labs saying, you just published a booklet, 32 or 64 pages, praising, lauding, extolling the engineers who created the picture phone and all the wonderful things that will come. Did you do any study of the social impact of the picture phone? Well, my immediate boss contacted me and said, you've been communicating with the president of the lab without consulting me. That's not right. And basically the letter back from the president said, oh, well, you raised some important issues, but those are things for sociologists and psychologists, and that's not what we do at Bell Labs. They can do whatever they want. So at that time, technology was deeply in the blinders on and don't pay attention to the side effects. Oh, I forgot the other 2 points, but they'll come back. Let's see. Haven't retrieved them yet, but I'll wait. Thank you for mentioning her. There are several people who have commented on these dangers, and that generally I always try to view with a jaundiced eye and some skepticism everyone who seemed to be 100% gung-ho about the value of a particular technology. Yes?
Also, I think that fifth computer with the early vector drawing software is at Fort Meade.
Is where?
I think it's at Fort Meade in Maryland,
Might be.
where the NSA is.
I think there was one at NSA and somewhere else, so that could be the case for the LDS-1. Yes.
In your design work that you do for corporate clients, for example, how much of that is done with direct computer interface versus how much of that is done, let's say, drawing, design,
Hand sketching
screening
on
that and
paper?
scanning them in, and or in some way inputting them into the computer for later manipulation? That is, how do you sort of divide the sort of, hard hands-on versus using the computer?
Certainly in intermediate days, a lot of work was done with sketches on paper. I personally prefer that still. But a lot of my earlier staff were quite adept working directly with graphics manipulation software to create whatever needed to be done and to do that quickly. And there you're speaking of detailed issues about the appearance of something. But designing a user interface is not only about the appearance of things, but human interaction with things that often have to be diagrammed or demonstrated through videos or through some mock-ups of various kinds. Plus, a detailed analysis of navigation and the structure of information, which is depicted through diagrammatic lists and other things, so that you can understand what is this thing of 3,000 different screens going to be, and how is it connected, and how does it meet user needs. And increasingly, in what's called a user or human-centered design process, you invite some human beings in to co-create or to comment at every step of the way on whether something seems to make sense from normal people's point of view. In the earlier days of computer technology, well, first of all, large technical systems like battleships or the Boeing 747 were designed with the so-called waterfall method, that you just started with the big ideas and overall organization, you kept going, and finally you ended with the 747, and no one was ever consulted in that process, from general to specific. In interactive design of interactive systems, people are creating very quick sketch versions of things that are continuously refined. And when someone says, it's okay to roll out, you send it out. It's, for better or worse, we all suffer from beta versions of products that are released. They aren't ever as finished as they might have been in the past. Yes?
I'm curious about that topic about beta products. Are there systems or devices or institutions or even styles of design that are perhaps pet pleasing to you or your company? Pet peeves, like, meaning that you wish you could redesign the way that X works, or you see something that in the design world that is so frustrating or inefficient or not.
Oh, I am constantly running into things.
Like, can
Well,
you pick one or two?
I mean, voicemail messaging systems. What was it recently? I don't know whether it's Kaiser's questionnaires on usability. How did we do? That are so incompetent in getting to serious feedback of what might be wrong and how they could improve things. And instead of forcing you into quick, we did great. Or if you're not perfect, it will ask you, what did we do wrong? And I think there's a tremendous psychological pressure for grade inflation of evaluations, which is just terrible. And anyway, in the old days, all product developers would pay people in test groups to bring them in and carefully test them. Now we're all unpaid evaluators of products. It's a scam brought to us by modern technology. Thank you for that question. So thank you for your questions and comments. I'll stick around for a few minutes, and I'll send you these materials if you're interested, and I look forward to further discussion for those of you that I'll see again. Thank you. Bye-bye.